Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christian, and welcome to CatechesisCraft, where we talk Christianity and play Minecraft. This is the 39th installment in a series of videos designed as a teaching tool with the goal of being applicable to all audiences, regardless of how much, how little, or what fashion of faith that you, my wonderful viewers, might have. At the time of writing and recording this, I have just recently returned from a week-long family vacation to Florida. And though I am currently sick as a dog, the work goes on. Today we'll be discussing St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest colonial city in the North American continent and the first city in the United States. What makes St. Augustine, Florida so special? Why does this city warrant a video on a channel like this? What impact does St. Augustine, Florida have on American history, and how does this intersect with the church? As I'm sure you can tell, we have a lot to get into, but first, I'd like to reiterate the fact that this channel is not focused on Christian polemics. I am not here to criticize you specifically, my wonderful viewers, for your type of Christianity, nor am I here to force any of you into believing exactly every single thing that I believe. I have faith that each of you watching this video is more than intelligent enough to tell the difference between objective analysis and subjective preferences, but of course, it does bear repeating. One final thing. If this or any of my previous work helps or entertains you in any way, please consider sharing this with someone who you know would benefit the most from it. Now, without further ado, let's discuss St. Augustine, Florida, the first city in America. On the 13th of November, AD 354, St. Augustine was born to Patricius and Monica in the municipium, or city, of Thagaste, in the Roman province of Numidia, which today would be the city of Souk Ahras in the north of Algeria, near the Mediterranean coast. His father, Patricius, was a pagan, and his mother, Monica, was a devout Christian, herself a saint. Only 29 years after the First Council of Nicaea, Christianity had just recently been freed from persecution within the Roman Empire, and its faithful treated equally under the law. According to the majority of historic and contemporary scholarship, St. Augustine and his family were most likely Berbers, a North African ethnic group whose Mediterranean complexion stands out among the wider population of the continent. Native to North Africa, the Berbers were mentioned by ancient Egyptian texts as far back as 2000 BC, marking these people as far older occupants of the region than their sub-Saharan and Arabic neighbors who now account for the majority of Algeria's population. This is not to say that Berbers are older than sub-Saharan African people. However, before sub-Saharan African and Arabic people had occupied the region that is now Algeria, the Berbers were here. In his youth, St. Augustine was sent to study in the small Numidian town of Madaurus, where he was instructed in all manner of Roman culture, literature, and beliefs, including the predominant pagan beliefs of the empire. Around the age of 17, he would travel to the great city of Carthage to continue his education, where he was further influenced by pagan philosophy, rhetoric, and the secular interests of his peers. Though raised Christian by his mother, Saint Monica, he found the pagan religion of Manichaeism to be especially interesting. Founded in the 2nd century AD by the so-called Parthian prophet Mani, this pagan belief is centrally focused on a dualistic view of the world, with the good being the spiritual world of light and the evil being the material world of darkness. As you, my wonderful viewers, likely recognize, this sounds extremely similar to Docetism and Marcionism, both of which we have discussed in our series on the Apostolic Fathers. It would not be until the age of 31 that St. Augustine would return to his Christian roots, and from here, the story of the great saint is due for its own separate video one day. Today, St. Augustine is recognized among the Catholic and Orthodox churches as one of the greatest saints of his era, and one of the greatest saints in the church, a church father in his own right, and, in the eyes of the Catholic Church, one of a select group of saints to be called a doctor of the church. His legacy lives on in his writings, most famously Confessions, and the City of God, along with apologetic texts on Christian doctrine, defending against a wide variety of contemporary heresies, and textual analyses of many of the books of the Bible, among others, each of which perhaps will be covered at a later date. More than this, St. Augustine's Rule of St. Augustine would directly influence a 13th century community of monks to found the monastic Order of St. Augustine, whose most recently notable figure is our own recently elected Pope Leo XIV. In 1492, Christopher Columbus would petition King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella I of the then United Kingdom of Spain, who would grant the Italian explorer the funding, the manpower, and the material requests for an exploration to the west of the Atlantic. In the early hours of the 11th of October 1492, he found what are now the islands of the Bahamas, naming the first of his exploration San Salvador. Knowingly or not, Christopher Columbus began what would be called the Age of Exploration, a watershed moment in European and global history. In 1513, another great explorer, Juan Ponce de Leon, the then governor of Puerto Rico, would travel north from the Spanish islands to the peninsula he would then call La Florida, claiming the land for Spain. Finally, on the 28th of August, 1565, the feast day of St. Augustine in the Catholic Church, Conquistador Pedro Menendez de Avilés would found the city of St. Augustine along the northeastern coast of what is now the state of Florida. With the founding of the city in St. Augustine, Menendez unknowingly established the oldest city in what would become the United States. In its early years, the city was centered around 2 points: St. Augustine's Basilica Cathedral and Castillo de San Marcos, or the Castle of St. Mark, which was a Spanish star fort. These 2 sites, the church and the fort, are among the oldest standing structures in the city, and the parish community of St. Augustine is the oldest Christian community in the whole of the continental United States. Father Francisco Lopez de Mendoza Grajales, who we will succinctly call Father Grajales from now on, was the expedition's chaplain. He would immediately set up a makeshift altar and celebrate the first Mass on the continental United States upon landing at St. Augustine on the 2nd of September 1565, and would go on to found the first Franciscan monastic community in the region on the landing site itself. This Thanksgiving Mass, predating the first American Thanksgiving as it is remembered in our history by 56 years, definitively places this ancient sacramental meal as the first meal celebrated on the continental United States. Serving both the European settlers and natives of the region, the Franciscan mission proclaimed the Catholic faith and promoted Catholic culture to the readily and eagerly converted Moacama and Timucua native peoples of the region. The early Spanish fort was constructed around the Great House, which was a building gifted to the expedition team by the Timucua people, which was reinforced with timber battlements, a moat, and earthen mounds. The stone star fort that now sits on the site of the former Great House would begin construction in 1672, and the current fortress was completed in 1695, 140 years after the city's founding. Over the course of the city's history, the Star Fort, the church, and its parish community would face scores of conflicts with the great European powers, face near eradication during the British's burning of the city, and would be a first-hand account of the many stories of American history through the ages. Of the 460 years of history that we could focus on, today our story begins in 1670. The British colonial forces founded the settlement of Charlestown, which is now Charleston, South Carolina, approximately 180 nautical miles north of St. Augustine, a 2-day journey by ship on average. The Spanish star fort, Castillo de San Marcos, was a timber and mud fortification at the time, largely incorporating the great house of the Timucua peoples. By 1687, slaves from British Carolina began escaping south, seeking refuge in Spanish Florida, making their way to the city of St. Augustine. The acting governor of Spanish Florida, Diego de Quiroga, granted these escaped slaves freedom if they would convert to Catholicism. Those who did were also given accommodations and employment in various industries of the city and the colony at large. A year later, British military officers began entering Spanish Florida seeking to reclaim these escaped slaves. Governor de Quiroga refused to relinquish what he saw as former slaves, and the tensions between British and Spanish forces rose to a boiling point. By 1693, word of this policy reached the ears of King Charles II of Spain, who formalized the policy of Governor de Quiroga across the entire Spanish Empire, and full-scale conflict erupted between Spain and England by 1702. In November of 1702, the British besieged the city for a period of 2 months. At the end of the siege, the 1,500 residents of the city who were crammed into the early Coquina stone fort were relieved when the Spanish fleet arrived from Havana. The relatively light British cannons delivered only surface-level damage at most to the strong Coquina stone fort, and the British officers ordered the burning of their own ships and the city itself, preferring to march back to Carolina rather than have the ships fall to Spaniard hands. To this day, no wooden structures older than 1702 remain in the city of St. Augustine, including the original parish church. 30 years later, and after the reconstruction of the town, the fort received a second round of stonework and improvements under the supervision of Pedro Ruiz de Olano as the engineer. Timely as ever, British and Spanish relations rose to a boiling point once again in 1740. Just as with the 1702 siege, the British cannons were yet still ineffective against the strong Coquina stone fort, and General James Oglethorpe, the founder of Georgia, preferred to retreat rather than wait for the Spanish fleet to arrive. Shortly after the siege, the Spanish would begin construction of Fort Matanzas along the river, ensuring further blockades and sieges would be extremely untenable. At this time, following the second siege, reconstruction of St. Augustine began, starting with repairs to their church, now the St. Augustine Basilica Cathedral, which stands to this day. Spanish Florida, and St. Augustine in particular, remained a sanctuary for escaped slaves for years to come, even into the American War for Independence, where the British, taking Spanish Florida during the 7 Years' War, promised slaves freedom if they fought against the Continental forces. At the Peace of Paris in 1783, the treaty called for the return of Florida to Spanish control, where this policy would continue. While the Spanish would continue to improve the fort to its modern structure, they would transfer its ownership, along with Florida, entirely to the United States in 1821. During the American Civil War, the city and its forts were captured by the Confederacy without firing a single shot, and similarly returned to the Union control in 1867 without any damage to the city, its people, or the fort, where the Southern Confederacy slavery policies were quickly overturned, continuing the great tradition of the first great American city. In the oldest city in America, millions of stories over the last 460 years could and would deserve to be told. For today, especially considering my current state of ailment at the time of writing and recording this, we will end with that. If St. Augustine, Florida could be remembered for anything, it should be remembered for these. The first and oldest city in the continental United States is not only a Catholic city, cementing the Catholic legacy and influence upon the nation, but most importantly, was a bastion of Catholic culture, teachings, and doctrine, staunchly standing against slavery and the many evils often accredited to this period in Western history. So great was the influence of St. Augustine, Florida, that the Spanish imperial monarch would proclaim the governor's doctrine against slavery across the entirety of his imperial domain, though its credit is rarely ever mentioned to this day. St. Augustine, pray for us, and may we remember the importance of the first great American city. No matter what denomination or lack thereof that you ascribe to, I hope this has been educational and given you, my wonderful viewers, a primer on the oldest city in America, the Catholic influence upon the United States, and the wider place in history accredited to St. Augustine, Florida. As always, I highly suggest that if you are interested in a deeper understanding of a specific denomination's doctrine, the best place to go will always be an actual pastor, priest, or well-lettered theologian in that tradition. I am merely a layman, doing the very best that I can with the gifts that God has given me, and hopefully illuminating the path along the way for all of you. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, if you have found it informative or educational in any way, please consider leaving a like, comment what you gained most from it, and please share this or any previous work with those who you believe would benefit the most from it. If you're interested in more videos like this, good news! Next Sunday we will be discussing Pentecost, the next great holiday in the liturgical calendar. Following this, we continue once more with our series on the Apostolic Fathers, now that I have returned home and, by the grace of God, will no longer be sick, with more content well on its way. So please make sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications for future releases. This has been the 39th installment in what I pray will be a long and fruitful series, taking biblical topics and concepts large and small, and forming them into simple, digestible bites with some gameplay in the back because, let's face it, it's nice to have something on screen while you're learning. Leave a comment if you would like a certain topic to be covered, as I do read as many comments as I can on these videos, and it's always good to know what my audience wants to see. If you would like the opportunity for your questions to be read out in a video, please send your Q&A questions to our email, CatechesisCraft@gmail.com. I will occasionally be posting Q&A videos where I answer directly the questions that you guys have about Christianity. There's nothing at all off the table, but I cannot necessarily guarantee that every single question will be answered in every single one of the Q&A videos. Even still, my goal is to make this an open resource of simple, straightforward, and clear answers that accurately represent the beliefs of Christians across time. If you would like to pick up a Bible for yourself, which, if you are a longtime viewer, I'm sure you can tell is pretty central to our work here, consider checking out our video on Bible translations and using the links below that video for your choice. Each product linked in the description utilizes Amazon affiliate links, and every single purchase using these links costs absolutely nothing extra to you, but provides us here at CatechesisCraft with a small percentage to help fund our work. You can also become a supporter on Locals for just $10 a month and get access to supplementary articles, blog posts, and at some point, live streams and access to a Minecraft server, both of which are coming soon in the biblical sense. But all of that is completely optional. I'm excited to be on this journey with all of you, and I'm extremely thankful for the fact that you chose to watch this video. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, whenever you happen to be watching this. God bless, and I'll see you all next time.